It was the phone call that changed everything. "Your brother is missing," my mother said, her voice trembling. I froze, the words sinking into me like a cold dagger. Missing? The brother I grew up with. The one who promised we'd always have. Each other's backs, vanished without a trace. The police had no leads, no clues, just a cryptic message left on his voicemail. "It's not what you think." But what did that mean? What had he gotten himself into? And why did the message feel like a warning? How far would I have to go to uncover the truth? For as long as I can remember, my family had a way of making me feel invisible. I wasn't the favorite child. I wasn't the one they praised or even acknowledged most of the time. I was the one who seemed to always fall short, the one they forgot at family gatherings, the one they overlooked in favor of my more accomplished siblings. Growing up, I was used to the feeling of being the odd one out. It was as if my achievements, if they could even be called that, weren't worthy of attention. My siblings, Mark and Emily, both followed the traditional paths. Mark went into finance, climbing the corporate ladder with ease. Emily, always the golden child, married young, had kids, and excelled at everything. Meanwhile, I was, well, just me. I pursued my passion for graphic design, working long hours, staying up late to perfect my craft. I wasn't a high flyer. I wasn't getting promotions or accolades. But I was building something for myself. No one cared, though. To them, I was just the dreamer who wasn't realistic enough to fit into the family's mold. They looked at me as though I was wasting time on something that would never amount to much. The truth was, I didn't mind. For the most part, I was content. I had my art, my small studio apartment, and the occasional dinner with friends. But there was always that nagging voice in the back of my head, the voice that reminded me that my family had never really believed in me. It wasn't just the lack of praise. It was the way they acted around me. Family reunions were always awkward, with polite but distant conversations. I wasn't included in group chats or family vacations. I could feel the invisible barrier between me and everyone else, as if I was some sort of outsider, an afterthought. And yet, despite all that, I tried so hard to earn their approval. Every birthday, every holiday, I would show up with a smile and hope that maybe, just maybe, this year they would see something in me worth celebrating. But nothing ever changed. They were too busy with their own lives to even notice I was there. I learned to make peace with it. I told myself that I didn't need them, that I was enough on my own. But then everything changed. It happened slowly at first. I didn't wake up one morning to $1 million check in my mailbox or a flashy announcement that I'd suddenly hit it big. No, it wasn't that simple. It started with a spark of an idea, one that I believed in so fiercely, but that no one else did. I poured every ounce of energy into my work. Graphic designs, branding, digital art. I believed that if I could just put myself out there, someone, somewhere would notice. And they did. A small online startup reached out to me offering me a modest contract to design a logo. It wasn't much, but it was a foot in the door. It gave me hope. I pushed harder, worked longer, and built my portfolio. Over time, I started gaining more clients, local businesses, entrepreneurs, even a couple of influencers. The money was good. Not life-changing, but enough to make me feel like I was finally on the right track. Then, one day, it happened. I got an offer from a huge tech company. They wanted me to design their rebranding, a project that was worth more money than I had ever imagined. It was a breakthrough, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that could change everything. I poured everything I had into it. Every late night, every idea, every ounce of creativity I had, knowing that this was my shot. The contract was signed, the designs approved, and when the money finally hit my account, I stared at the digits in disbelief. I had done it. I had crossed the threshold from struggling artist to millionaire. I didn't tell anyone at first. The overwhelming sense of accomplishment was enough to keep me quiet, to let me savor the moment in solitude. I hadn't expected this, hadn't planned on it. All those years of being dismissed, of not being good enough, they suddenly didn't matter. I had made it on my own, without anyone's help, and that felt better than any approval I could have ever received. But then, it started. It wasn't long before my phone began ringing more often. At first, I thought it was just business. I was now on the radar of a few larger companies, and the work kept coming. But then, the calls started to shift. Slightly at first. But unmistakably, my mother was the first. She called one evening, her voice warmer than usual, the tone less distant than it had been for years. "Hey, honey," she said, sounding almost apologetic. "How have you been? I was just thinking about you." I was caught off guard. My mother and I hadn't spoken like this in, well, ever. The conversations we shared were usually brief and filled with surface-level chatter. But this time, there was an odd sincerity in her voice. We talked for a few minutes, and then she said it. "I heard about your success. I'm so proud of you." I didn't know how to respond. Pride? From her? It almost didn't feel real. Was she being genuine? Or was there something more to it? I didn't press her for more details, but I could feel the shift. It was as though she was tiptoeing around there, all reason for her call. Few days later, my brother Mark reached out too. He had always been the golden boy, the one who never needed to prove himself. But this time, his message had an edge of familiarity I hadn't seen in years. "We should catch up sometime," he suggested casually. "Just talk. It's been a while." I couldn't help but feel a pang of frustration. Where was all this coming from? Mark and I hadn't been close in ages, and now he was suddenly interested in me. But the more these calls came, first from my mother, then from Mark, and then from Emily, the more I realized something. They were all suddenly interested in me, in my success. It wasn't just about family catching up. It was about their access to something they had long since abandoned me for. It didn't take long for the requests to start coming in. It began as a small favor, a question here, a suggestion there. At first, I brushed it off. After all, family is family, right? They've been there for you, even if it was only in the background. Maybe this was just them reconnecting, realizing the distance between us had grown too wide. But as each request piled up, the cracks in that facade started to show. It was my mother again, this time with a more direct approach. "Honey, I hate to ask, but I've got a few things I need help with. Your dad's been ill and we've been struggling a bit to make ends meet. Would you be able to help us out?" I froze. Struggling? They had always been well off. My parents had a big house in the suburbs, a well-kept car, vacations every year. They had never struggled, not in the way that people who truly needed help did. So why now? But I didn't question it right away. I'd never wanted to come off as cruel or ungrateful, so I told her I'd see what I could do, asking for more details about what was going on. Then came Mark. He called out of nowhere one evening. "I was thinking, since you're doing so well, now maybe we could talk about investing in a few projects I've been working on. I'm sure you've heard of that new startup, right? They're looking for investors, and I think it could be a great opportunity. You've got the money now, why not put it to good use?" His voice was smooth, the kind of confidence that made it sound like he was doing me a favor. But I knew better. Mark was always looking for ways to benefit from other people's success. And now it seemed that person was me. "Just a thought," he added, as though it were no big deal. I felt a pang in my chest. The requests weren't even subtle anymore. They were asking for my wealth, my success, my hard-earned money, as if it was simply theirs to take. And there was no apology, no acknowledgement of how things had been between us for years. They weren't asking for help because they needed it in a real sense. They were asking because, now that I had money, I was seen as a resource. It wasn't just my immediate family. Soon after, distant relatives began to get in touch. Aunt Sarah, who hadn't spoken to me in years, suddenly reached out with a message. "I've heard about your success. I'm so happy for you. Maybe we can meet up soon. I've got a few bills piling up. Could use a little help." The requests kept coming one after another, like a slow, relentless tide, each wave a little bolder than the last. And with each call, text, or email, the knot in my stomach grew tighter. They didn't want me back in their lives because they loved me. They wanted me back because they needed something. It wasn't long before I started feeling the pressure. The subtle guilt trips became more pronounced as each family member tried to manipulate me into sharing my newfound wealth. It was as though they were all reading from the same script, the lines just different enough to make each request feel unique, yet eerily similar in their tone. The most insidious came from my mother. One afternoon, she invited me over to the house. I hesitated, but with everything that had been happening, I thought it might be good to have a real conversation, to understand where all this was coming from. She sat me down in the living room, the familiar couch still covered with the same floral-patterned fabric from my childhood. There was an air of sadness about her, something almost pleading that I hadn't seen before. Her fingers nervously twisted the hem of her cardigan as she spoke. "You know, honey, I've been thinking a lot about how we've drifted apart, and I realize that I didn't always understand you or your choices. But I want you to know, I'm so proud of how far you've come. You've made something of yourself when no one believed in you." Her voice cracked a little at the end, and for a moment, I almost felt a twinge of sympathy. Almost. "But now, with everything that's happened," she continued, her voice dropping low, "we could really use your help. Your father's health is declining, and it's getting harder to make ends meet. I know things weren't always perfect between us, but this is about family now. I don't want you to feel like you have to do anything, but we could really use your support." I could hear the words hanging in the air like a weight, and I knew exactly what she was implying. The guilt was palpable. She was playing the victim, trying to make me feel responsible for them, emotionally, financially. She made it sound like if I didn't help, I was turning my back on family, abandoning them when they needed me most. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at her, unsure of how to react. It wasn't that I didn't want to help. If they were truly struggling, I would want to be there. But this felt wrong. They had never been there for me when I needed them, not in any real, tangible way. So why now? Why did they think they had the right to come back into my life simply because I had money? I could feel the conflict rising in my chest. The family I had tried so hard to please, to win over, was now asking for my help. But not because they cared about me. They needed me to save them from their own choices. I left her house that day feeling more conflicted than ever. The guilt she placed on me felt suffocating, but it also stirred a deep resentment within me. How could they ask for help after everything? It was only a matter of time before I was cornered by them altogether. The dinner invitation came a week after my conversation with my mother. At first, I hesitated. I knew what it would be, a subtle but unmistakable attempt to reel me in, to get me to help in ways that went far beyond a simple family reunion. Still, I agreed. I told myself I needed to get closure, or at least understand where they were, all coming from. Perhaps they just didn't know how to approach me. Maybe they were just worried about their own struggles. Maybe this was their way of trying to reconcile with me. I arrived at the house, and the moment I walked in, the atmosphere felt different. There was a tension in the air, a sense that something was about to happen, but I couldn't pinpoint what. My siblings, Mark and Emily, were there, seated at the dining table, their faces too composed, almost as if they were preparing for something. My mother, who had always been the center of everything, greeted me with a tight smile, as though her relief at my arrival was tempered with an unspoken urgency. It didn't take long for the conversation to take a sharp turn. Mark started it, his tone casual, almost too casual. "So you know," he began, clearing his throat, "I was thinking about that new business opportunity I mentioned the other day." He leaned forward, his voice a little more pointed now. "I mean, it's a great investment, and with the money you've made, it could be the perfect way to diversify. You know, for long-term stability." I looked around at the others, my mother, Emily, all waiting for my reaction. It was as if they had been waiting for me to say something, for me to acknowledge that their interest wasn't just about family, but about business. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Mark, I thought we were just talking. I didn't know you were actually asking for money." His smile faltered for a second, but he quickly recovered. "I wasn't asking for a handout," he said, his tone a little defensive now. "I'm offering you an opportunity to grow. I think it could be mutually beneficial for both of us." I saw through the words. He wasn't offering a partnership. He was offering a way to latch on to my success, to share in my wealth without ever having put in the work. Before I could respond, Emily chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. Well, we've all been so proud of you, and I've been thinking. She hesitated, her fingers playing with the edge of her napkin. I've been struggling with a few bills. The kids and all. Just some extra help would be amazing. A tight laugh bubbled up from my throat, though it was far from humorous. Bills? I repeated. When you're talking about bills, are we talking about real struggles, or are we just hoping I'll foot the bill for your luxury spending? I didn't try to hide the edge in my voice. The years of being overlooked and dismissed were bubbling up to the surface. They all sat in silence for a moment, exchanging glances. The shift was palpable. I wasn't playing along anymore. And then it happened. My mother, the one who had always been the peacemaker, the one who had softened put on a mask of indifference, finally let it slip. It's just, you've made it now. You can afford to help. We're family, and family supports each other. I don't know why you're being so difficult about this. Her words hit like a slap across the face. Difficult? I whispered, stunned. Is that what this is about? You think I'm being difficult for not just handing over money to everyone who asks? The room was silent for a moment, my family staring at me with a mixture of frustration and expectation. They didn't see it, the problem with their behavior. To them, this was just how it was. They had always assumed my success was meant to be shared, that the wealth, the resources, the things I had built were somehow owed to them. All of you have treated me like I wasn't good enough for years. I continued, my voice shaking now with a mix of anger and hurt. You made me feel invisible, and now that I've finally built something of my own, you think you have the right to claim a piece of it? I stood up, the weight of the conversation too much to bear. I don't owe anyone anything. I worked for this, and I don't have to justify it to you or anyone else. You ignored me when I needed support. And now that I'm successful, you think you can just walk in and ask for a handout? I'm not doing this anymore. And just like that, the mask fell. The people I had spent years trying to impress, trying to prove myself to, suddenly seemed so small in my eyes. It wasn't the help they needed, it was my success. They wanted access to it, to be a part of it, because they finally realized I had something they could never have: success, independence, and self-worth. I left the dinner early, walking out with a clarity I had never felt before. I wasn't a cash cow for their convenience, and I certainly wasn't going to let them rewrite the narrative of my success. It wasn't just the dinner that shattered something inside me. It was the realization that I had been a fool for hoping that my family could be the source of any meaningful connection or support. The years of trying to please them, of seeking validation from people who had never cared about my happiness or success, suddenly felt like a waste of energy. I had spent so much time thinking that if I made it, they would finally see me. But all they saw now was an opportunity. I took some time away, retreating to my apartment, where I could think clearly without the noise of their expectations. I poured myself a drink, staring at the skyline through my window, the city lights, twinkling like some distant dream. How had it come to this? The hardest part was that deep down, I still craved their approval. I wanted to be able to share my success with them, to have them genuinely appreciate what I had built. But that wasn't the reality. The reality was they didn't care about me. They cared about what I could do for them, what I could offer them, and that I had money. A week later, I got another call from Mark. This time, his tone was different. It wasn't just business anymore. Hey, I've been thinking, he started, his voice low, almost apologetic. I get it, okay? I shouldn't have pushed you. I'm sorry. It's just, it's been tough lately. With Dad's health and everything. I was just hoping you'd be there, like we used to be. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that maybe this was a real attempt to reconnect, to repair what had been broken. But the cynicism in me couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about family. This was about guilt. About him realizing that I wasn't just some source of money he could call on whenever it was convenient. I get it, Mark. You're looking for help, I said, my voice steady but firm. But I'm not your bank, and I'm not your emergency fund. You're not reaching out because you care about me, you're reaching out because you need something. I can't be your solution to everything anymore." There was silence on the other end. I could hear him breathing, the weight of what I'd just said hanging between us. "Look, I don't want to fight," he said finally, his voice sounding a little defeated. "I just thought we could be family again, just like before." "Before?" I laughed bitterly. "Mark, there's no going back. You don't get to suddenly come to me when things are difficult and pretend like you've always been there. I've spent my whole life trying to earn your approval, and I'm done." We both sat in silence for a long moment. It wasn't the dramatic fight I thought it would be. It wasn't explosive. It was quiet, subdued, like the air had been let out of a balloon. "I'll always be your sister," I said, finally breaking the silence. "But I'm not your safety net anymore. You have to figure out your own life, just like I did." The conversation ended, and I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Relief? Sadness? It was all tangled up inside me like I'd just severed a part of my identity. But I couldn't go back to being the person they wanted me to be, the one who was just there to pick up the pieces when they needed me. And yet, part of me still felt like I had lost something I'd never fully understood. The days that followed were a blur of mixed emotions. I found myself constantly reflecting on the choices I had made, the conversations I'd had, and the new reality I was facing. It was clear now that my family didn't understand the kind of success I had built, nor did they appreciate the sacrifices it took to get here. What they saw was a golden opportunity, a way to right their wrongs by latching onto my success. But the truth was, I didn't owe them anything, not a single penny, not a second of my time, and certainly not the approval they'd so long sought from me. Despite everything, though, I couldn't entirely let go of the hope that maybe, just maybe, there could be a chance for something real with them. But with each request, each conversation, I was forced to confront the truth. The people I had longed to be seen by had never really seen me at all. They only saw what I could offer. One evening, as I sat in my apartment, I thought about everything I had worked for. The late nights, the endless revisions, the doubts that I fought through, and the loneliness that often accompanied it all. I had built something from the ground up. A life and career that didn't rely on anyone's approval but my own. And now, I had to decide what mattered most. Holding on to the past and the fleeting hope that my family would suddenly change? Or standing firm in my new reality and not letting them back into my life, not in this way. The decision wasn't easy, but it was simple. I had worked too hard to let anyone else take credit for my success, to let anyone manipulate me into thinking they deserved a piece of it. They hadn't been there when I needed them. And now that I didn't need them, they wanted to take everything I had worked for. I picked up my phone and called the family attorney, someone I had grown to trust over the past few months. "I need you to help me set up a legal framework for the future," I said, my voice steady. "I want to make sure that no one can come after me for what I've worked for. My family, they don't get to take what's mine." I felt a certain strength in those words, a clarity I had never felt before. For the first time, I wasn't trying to please anyone. I was making a decision for me. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about spite. It was about protecting my peace, my independence, and the life I had built. The next morning, I visited my lawyer's office. I signed the necessary documents to ensure that my wealth was protected, that no one, least of all my family, could come in and claim it, just because they suddenly decided they wanted a piece of my success. I felt a strange mix of finality and freedom. It was done. The boundaries were set. A few weeks later, I received another call from my mother. Her voice was different this time, quieter, more resigned. "I've been thinking about everything you said," she began. "And I understand now. I'm sorry. I know I've made mistakes. But I just want you to know, I love you. And I always have." I was silent for a moment. It would have been easy to fall back into old patterns, to give in to the familiarity of her voice, to pretend that nothing had changed. But I knew better. "I love you too, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "But I need to do this on my own now. I can't keep going back and forth. This is my life, and I need to live it on my own terms. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I understand, honey. I really do. I just wish things had been different. I didn't respond right away. What could I say? Things couldn't be different. The truth was, they hadn't seen me for who I was when I needed them. Now that I was successful, I couldn't let them rewrite the narrative. I had to keep moving forward. As I hung up the phone, a sense of relief washed over me. The weight of my past, of all the years of longing for approval, had finally lifted. I was free. Free to be myself, free to enjoy my success without feeling guilty or obligated to anyone. And for the first time in my life, I truly understood that the greatest success wasn't the wealth I had gained, but the strength I had found in myself to stand firm and protect it.